The distant sound of the train was the first sign. The low, deep rumble that vibrated through the air, sending shivers down Maya's spine. She stopped in her tracks, her head turning toward the old railway tracks that cut through the forest. It wasn't just a train, it was a freight train, the kind that never slowed down, the kind that moved with power and speed, and today, it was getting dangerously close. Maya, the golden retriever, had always been sharp. She had seen and heard things in her life, wild animals, storms, people, but today, something felt different. The forest around her seemed to hold its breath. The animals were quiet, too quiet. Her instincts told her to move. Now, she looked to her cubs. They were playing just beyond the tracks, chasing each other, unaware of the looming danger. Her heart raced, her paws itched with panic, but she stayed still, watching them for just a moment longer. The train's roar grew louder, almost deafening now. Maya barked, her voice trembling with urgency, but the cubs didn't hear. Or if they did, they didn't care. They were too young, too carefree, lost in their own little world. Maya's mind spun. She couldn't waste any more time. She had to get them away from the tracks, away from the oncoming train. Maya sprinted toward her cubs, her body low to the ground, her tail tucked in fear. She barked again, louder this time, a sharp command that should have made them stop and listen. But they didn't. The sound of the train now shook the ground beneath them, the air vibrating with its power. Maya's heart pounded in her chest. She was close now, so close, and yet, the cubs were still oblivious. "Maya! Come on!" one of the cubs yelped, as they rolled around, tumbling through the grass. Maya stopped in her tracks, her heart leaping into her throat. She could feel it now. The fear. The urgency. The train was too close. Too close to ignore. She barked once more, her voice full of raw panic. The cubs froze. Finally, they looked up at her, confused, their small faces filled with innocence. Maya's eyes widened. She pushed forward, trying to drag them, but they resisted, pawing at the ground. "No, Mama. We're playing," they whined. But they didn't know what was coming. They couldn't know. Maya glanced over her shoulder, and that's when she saw it. The man. A figure, standing in the distance, walking slowly down the tracks, completely unaware of the speeding train. Her breath caught in her throat. What was he doing here? Did he not hear the train? Was he blind to the danger? The man was approaching the tracks, his hands in his pockets, strolling like it was just another day. Maya's heart pounded faster, almost in sync with the train's accelerating roar. She needed help, and this man, this stranger, was the only one who could hear her. She ran toward him, her body screaming for him to turn around. She barked, but he didn't even flinch. He didn't stop. She barked louder, hoping to get his attention, but he was lost in his own world, walking toward the tracks like there was nothing wrong. She felt the panic rise inside her like a storm. The train horn blared again, closer now, a deafening sound. Maya's eyes flicked to her cubs, who were still playing. The ground shook beneath her paws, the air vibrating with each passing second. She was running out of time. The man was still moving toward the tracks, and Maya's thoughts were racing. Should she leave her cubs and try to warn him? Or should she stay, drag her cubs to safety and hope they made it in time? Every instinct in her body screamed for her to protect her cubs, but a part of her wondered if the man could somehow save them all. Maybe he'd hear the train. Maybe he'd see the danger. The ground beneath her paws rumbled again, stronger now. Maya's chest tightened. She turned, once more looking toward her cubs, but as she did, one of them darted forward, slipping toward the tracks. Maya's heart skipped a beat. No. The train was so close now, the horn deafening. Maya's world narrowed into a single moment. She had no choice. She dashed toward the cub, her paws moving faster than they ever had. She wasn't sure if she would make it, but there was no time to think. Only to act. And then, just as she reached the cub, the unimaginable happened. The train's horn sounded one last time, so loud it shook the trees. The cub froze. And Maya, her heart in her throat, reached out, just in time. Maya's heart stopped. The cub was standing right there, inches from the tracks. Her breath caught in her throat as she saw the giant wheels of the train coming closer, its steel body barreling toward them with terrifying speed. It was too fast, too close. In one desperate, instinctive move, Maya leaped forward, grabbing the cub by the scruff of its neck with her powerful jaws. The cub squealed in surprise as Maya yanked it back, pulling it just inches away from the metal beast that was about to swallow them whole. The roar of the train thundered past them, so loud that Maya could feel the vibrations in her bones. For a split second, everything seemed to freeze, the world around her, the sounds, the air itself. She could feel the heat of the train, the rush of air as it passed, and the sickening thud of her heart racing. Maya barely had time to breathe before she was running again, pulling the cub back toward the safety of the trees. The train, now a blur in the distance, faded into the background of her mind as she focused on the trembling, wide-eyed cub in her mouth. Her paws scraped against the gravel, her claws digging deep into the earth, pushing forward with every ounce of strength she had left. She finally reached the edge of the forest, breathless and shaking. She dropped the cub and stepped back, her gaze never leaving the tracks. The train was gone now, its powerful engine fading into the distance, but Maya could still feel the aftershock of it. Her body was tense, still vibrating with the fear, the adrenaline that had surged through her veins moments ago. The cub, still trembling, stared up at her with wide, innocent eyes. "Mama, what happened?" it asked, its voice soft, confused. The fear in its eyes was unmistakable, but it didn't fully understand the danger it had just escaped. Maya swallowed hard, her heart still pounding. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Her eyes softened as she looked down at the cub, but inside, her world was still spinning. That could have been it. That could have been the end. She could have lost her baby. Maya glanced over at the other cub, who was still playing a little farther off, unaware of the catastrophe that had just unfolded. She wanted to run to them, to gather them both up and keep them safe, but her body felt frozen, like the earth beneath her paws had turned to stone. The shock was setting in, a heavy weight pressing down on her chest. She had saved one, but she was terrified of the train coming back, of what would happen if the cubs strayed too close again. "Stay here," Maya said, her voice trembling slightly. She nudged the cub she had just saved with her nose, urging it to stay low to the ground. "Don't move." The cub nodded, still wide-eyed, but it wasn't completely afraid anymore. It was starting to understand that something terrible had happened. Maya turned away quickly, her paws moving faster than ever before as she ran to the other cub. She reached the second cub just as it was about to wander near the tracks. Her heart leaped in her chest again, her breath hitching as she rushed forward, nudging it back with force. "No," she barked urgently, her voice sharp, her body rigid with fear. The cub, startled, looked up at her with confusion and curiosity. "Mama, why are you so scared?" it asked, tilting its head. It had no idea what had just happened, no idea that it had narrowly escaped death, no idea how close the danger had been. Maya's chest heaved with relief, but she didn't have time to explain. Not now. Not when the train could come back at any moment. She scooped the cub up into her mouth, careful not to hurt it, and started to move back toward the safety of the trees, her legs pumping with the last bit of energy she had. As she neared the forest, she spotted the man again, still walking toward the tracks. He hadn't heard the train, hadn't seen the danger. Maya felt a mixture of frustration and disbelief well up inside her. Why wasn't he listening? Why wasn't he paying attention? Without thinking, she dropped the cub at the edge of the forest and darted out toward the man. Her paws hit the gravel with a rapid, frantic pace. She barked louder now, trying desperately to get his attention. "Hey! Move! Get off the tracks!" But the man didn't even flinch. He kept walking, his head down, oblivious to the deathly proximity of the speeding train. Maya's heart raced again, a sick feeling forming in her stomach. The train had already passed, but it didn't matter. The man was still in danger. How could he not hear it? Suddenly, Maya's mind clicked. The train. The sound of it. The train wasn't just dangerous to her cubs or the man, it could be dangerous to everyone who lived near these tracks, to every creature in this forest. What if this happened again? What if the next train wasn't so forgiving? A sudden, desperate idea flashed in her mind. She couldn't wait for help. She had to do something now. She had to make the man see the danger before it was too late. She ran faster, her paws pounding against the dirt, her heart racing in her chest. But this time, something was different. The man, he wasn't alone. There were other people behind him, a group of them, walking toward the tracks, unaware of the approaching train. Maya's pulse spiked. This is it. There was no more time. Maya's mind was racing. She could see the people now, all oblivious, getting closer to the tracks. The same terror flooded her veins again, but this time it was different. The situation was worse. The train had already passed, but more were coming. The thought of those innocent people walking toward their death sent a wave of panic through her. There was no time to hesitate, no time to second guess. She turned back toward the cubs, who were huddled in the shelter of the trees. Their wide eyes followed her every movement, unaware of the gravity of the situation. Maya's heart tightened at the sight of them, but there was no time to comfort them now. She had to act. In an instant, Maya made up her mind. She turned on her heels and dashed back toward the tracks, her paws pounding against the gravel with urgency. She had to stop the people, had to make them understand. As she approached, she could hear the distant sound of the next train's whistle, a warning, a shrill, sharp cry that seemed to echo in her very bones. She couldn't let them get any closer. Her instinct kicked in, and without thinking, Maya barked, a loud, piercing sound that echoed through the still air. She ran straight toward the man in the front, jumping in front of him with a force that surprised even herself. He stumbled backward, eyes wide, looking at her with confusion. "Move! Move now!" Maya barked, her voice raw and desperate. Her teeth were bared, her body tense, every muscle coiled like a spring ready to snap. She had to make him see. The man stood frozen for a moment, his gaze shifting from Maya to the tracks and then back at her, a frown furrowing on his brow. He was clearly confused, unsure of what was happening. His eyes flicked nervously toward the others behind him, but he didn't step away. Didn't move. Maya's patience wore thin. She couldn't afford this. Without another second to waste, she barked again, this time running in circles around him, blocking his path. She was trying to hurt him, trying to push him away from the tracks. But he only looked at her, his expression becoming more puzzled. "Maya," she heard a voice call behind her. The familiar sound of the cub's voice, full of fear and uncertainty, pulled her attention momentarily. She turned her head just for a second, just enough to see the little one standing at the edge of the trees, eyes wide with worry. That brief moment of distraction was enough to snap the man out of his daze. His eyes widened in understanding. "Hey! Get back!" he shouted to the group behind him, his voice panicked, almost frantic. But it was too late. The screech of metal, the blaring horn of the train, pierced the air, louder this time, much louder. Maya's stomach dropped, and she turned back toward the tracks, her breath catching in her throat. The train wasn't just coming, it was already barreling around the bend, the force of it shaking the ground beneath her paws. "Run! Run!" Maya howled as the ground began to vibrate beneath her. The man finally reacted, his feet stumbling backward as he realized the danger. But it wasn't just the man now. The others were frozen in place too shocked to move. The train was coming, faster than ever, and they were too close to the tracks. Too close to safety. Maya's body surged forward. She had to act now. She ran as fast as she could, slamming into the man's legs with enough force to knock him off balance. The other people were still standing there, staring at the approaching train in disbelief. Maya wasn't sure if they were too scared to move or if they simply hadn't understood yet. There was no more time. She was out of options. With one final, instinctive leap, Maya did the only thing she could think of. She dove into the group, knocking the nearest person, an older man, backward into the dirt, out of the train's path. The others scattered, some moving, some still frozen, unsure of what was happening. The train's whistle screamed, closer now. The sound seemed to pierce Maya's ears as she rushed toward the other person, a woman who had been closest to the train. She grabbed the woman by the arm with her teeth, pulling her back with all her strength. The woman screamed in shock but fell backward, away from the tracks. The train thundered past with a deafening roar, only inches from where they had been standing moments before. The force of the passing train pushed the group back, the air heavy with dust and the smell of hot metal. Maya's heart pounded in her chest as the train sped away, and for a moment, everything was still. The woman, her body trembling, collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath. The rest of the group, still in shock, looked around in stunned silence, realizing just how close they had come to death. But Maya couldn't afford to stop. Not yet. Not while they were still standing so close to danger. With the train gone, there was a moment of stunned silence before Maya turned, quickly darting back toward the forest. She could hear the cubs calling to her again, their voices full of anxiety. They had no idea what had just happened, but Maya could feel the tension in her muscles, the lingering dread. She had saved them, this time. But what about next time? Her paws hit the dirt as she ran faster than ever. She had to get back to her cubs, had to make sure they were safe. But she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something else coming. Something worse. As Maya sprinted back toward the shelter of the trees, the cubs' voices echoed through the forest, sharp with concern. Her heart was still racing, but her mind couldn't rest. She had saved the humans, but in doing so, she had put herself and her cubs in more danger than ever before. The train was only the beginning. There was something else lurking, something worse. Maya felt it in the air, thick with the kind of stillness that only came before a storm. When she reached the cubs, their faces were full of worry, eyes wide as they looked at her. But Maya didn't have time to explain. Her breath came in ragged gasps, and her eyes darted around, scanning the trees, the tracks, the horizon. The cubs, sensing something was wrong, moved closer to her. They huddled together, their small bodies trembling. "Mom, what's going on?" the older cub, the one with the darker fur, asked in a whisper, his voice trembling. His eyes were fixed on her with a mix of fear and trust. Maya paused for a moment, trying to steady herself. "There's no time to explain. We need to leave. Now." Before she could say more, a loud, distant sound reached her ears. It was faint at first, but it grew louder. The unmistakable sound of a train's whistle. Her blood turned cold. The tracks. They were still too close. She had no idea why, but something about this train felt different. She could almost feel the heavy, ominous presence pressing down on them. She turned to the cubs, urgency clear in her voice. "Get behind me. Stay close." They didn't hesitate. The younger cubs followed her lead, darting between the trees, their little paws scrambling to keep up. Maya's heart ached as she looked back at them. She had promised them safety, a quiet life away from danger. And now here they were, running for their lives in a forest she thought she knew so well. The sound of the train grew louder, too loud. It wasn't just any train now. It was different. It was close. Maya's mind raced as she led them through the thick underbrush, weaving through the trees. The cubs were struggling to keep up. She could hear their breathing, heavy and frantic. They were scared. She had never wanted this for them. But she had to protect them, no matter the cost. Suddenly, the sound of a growl ripped through the air, low and menacing. Maya froze, her body stiffening. That wasn't the sound of a train. That was the sound of something else. Something much closer, much more dangerous. She whipped her head around, looking into the shadows, trying to locate the source. And there it was, just beyond the edge of the trees. A pair of glowing eyes stared back at her, sharp and predatory. Maya's body tensed, her protective instincts taking over. It was a wolf. But not just any wolf. This one was massive, its coat a dark, menacing black. Its eyes gleamed with an eerie intelligence, watching her every movement. Maya had heard rumors of a rogue wolf in the area, but she never thought it would be this close. It had been stalking them, watching them. Her heart skipped a beat. The wolf was too close. And it wasn't alone. A low growl came from the shadows again, and a second set of eyes appeared. Then a third. And more. Maya's blood ran cold as she realized the truth. They were surrounded. The cubs, who had been quiet until now, suddenly froze. They had sensed it too, the fear in the air. The older cub pressed close to Maya's side, his small body trembling. "Mom, what do we do?" he whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of his own rapid breathing. Maya didn't have an answer. She could feel the wolves closing in, circling them, their eyes hungry with intent. The adrenaline surged through her body, but even with her heart pounding, she knew one thing: there was no way out. Her mind raced as the wolves moved closer, their growls growing louder, more threatening. Maya couldn't let them near the cubs. Not now. Not after everything she'd just done to keep them safe. She had to protect them, even if it meant facing the wolves head-on. But then, just as the first wolf lunged forward, something unexpected happened. A loud, sharp bark echoed through the trees, cutting through the tension. Maya's ears pricked up. That bark, it was familiar. She spun around, eyes searching frantically. And there, in the clearing, was a figure she hadn't expected to see again: Rusty. The golden dog from the tracks. The one who had warned the people. Rusty stood between Maya and the wolves, his body tense and poised. His fur was slightly matted, but there was a fire in his eyes. The wolves hesitated, their snarls dying down as they sized him up. They had been expecting a fight. But they weren't expecting Rusty. Maya's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know how he had found them, but she was grateful. With Rusty by her side, they might stand a chance. "Stay back," Rusty growled, his voice low and threatening. "This is my territory, and I'll defend it with my life." For a moment, the forest fell silent. The wolves, clearly aware of the challenge, stepped back. Their eyes never left Rusty, but there was a moment of hesitation. Then, with one last menacing snarl, they turned and melted into the shadows, disappearing into the darkness of the forest. Maya's body sagged with relief. The immediate danger was gone, but the question lingered: how long would it be before something else came for them? The wolves had retreated, but the forest felt darker now. More dangerous. Rusty turned toward Maya, his golden eyes softening. "You and your cubs are safe, for now. But you can't stay here." Maya nodded, still trying to catch her breath. She had saved the humans, but now, she was being saved by someone she barely knew. And yet, in that moment, Rusty felt like a lifeline. But what would they do now? Where would they go? Maya stood still for a moment, trying to steady her racing heart, still trembling from the close call with the wolves. Her cubs huddled closer, their eyes wide with uncertainty. They had been through so much already, and now, with the wolves gone, Maya wasn't sure what came next. The forest, once familiar and safe, felt like an unknown wilderness, full of dangers they hadn't seen before. Rusty, noticing her hesitation, took a step closer, his golden fur now almost glowing in the faint light of the dying day. His voice was steady but firm, as though he had seen things far worse than the shadows that loomed around them. "You can't stay here," he repeated, looking back toward the forest edge, his gaze sharp and alert. "This place, it's not safe anymore." Maya blinked, taking a deep breath as she gathered her thoughts. The words made sense. The wolves weren't the only threat, she realized. The train, the looming shadow of something much darker in the distance, this wasn't just about survival anymore. They needed to find a way to escape. Rusty looked down at the cubs, who were now pressed against their mother, their tiny bodies trembling. He softened, the fierce protector in him giving way to a gentleness Maya hadn't expected. "You've got to trust me. I can lead you to a safe place. But we have to go now, before it gets darker." Maya hesitated, the weight of her responsibility pressing down on her. She couldn't let her cubs down. But could she trust Rusty? The dog had helped them, yes, but he was still a stranger. Then again, she had no other choice. The wolves weren't the only predators out there, and she wasn't sure what dangers awaited them in the night. "Maya," Rusty's voice was soft, yet urgent, "if we wait too long, it might be too late. You know as well as I do that the night brings more dangers than just wolves." She nodded slowly, understanding his words all too well. The forest had never been this dangerous before. The train, the wolves, the lingering threat in the shadows, it was all too much. They had to move, and they had to move fast. "All right," Maya said finally, her voice strong despite the fear she still felt. "Lead the way." With a last glance at the spot where the wolves had vanished, Rusty turned and began to walk, his steps steady and sure. Maya followed closely behind, her cubs trailing at her heels. The soft rustling of the leaves beneath their paws was the only sound in the heavy silence of the woods. As they moved deeper into the forest, Maya noticed the air was different. It wasn't just the scent of pine and damp earth that filled her nose now. There was a faint, acrid smell, almost metallic, lingering in the air. Her ears pricked up. She had learned to trust her instincts over the years. Something wasn't right. "Rusty," she started, her voice low and cautious. "Do you smell that?" Rusty paused, sniffing the air. His body tensed, his gaze darting to the trees around them, as though he too sensed something out of place. He didn't answer immediately, but Maya could tell he was troubled. "It's not just wolves," he said finally, his tone grim. "Something else is out there. Something unnatural." Maya's heart skipped. The train had already been an ominous sign, but now this? What could be worse than the train, the wolves, and the forest closing in on them from all sides? Her mind raced with questions. What could Rusty mean by unnatural? Was it some other predator? Or something worse, something more dangerous than anything she had encountered before? As if on cue, a strange sound echoed through the trees, a low, rumbling growl, unlike anything Maya had ever heard. It wasn't a wolf's. It was too deep, too guttural. Her fur bristled as the noise grew louder, closer. The cubs froze behind her, their eyes wide with fear. Maya instinctively stepped in front of them, her body tense, prepared to protect them at all costs. But even she wasn't sure what they were up against now. Rusty's eyes narrowed, his body stiffening. "Stay close," he growled. "And don't make a sound." Maya didn't need to be told twice. She gathered her cubs into the circle of her body, her heart pounding in her chest. The growl grew louder still, now accompanied by the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps crashing through the underbrush. Something large was coming. And then, from the shadows, it emerged. It was massive, even larger than the wolves they had just encountered. Its fur was dark and matted, its eyes glowing an eerie yellow in the fading light. Its face was twisted with hunger, its mouth wide open as though it had been waiting for them. A bear. A monstrous, dark bear. Maya's heart slammed in her chest. She had never seen a bear this size in all her time in the forest. This one was different, wild, untamed, and driven by something more primal than hunger. It was a creature of pure instinct, and it was looking at them with one thought in mind: to destroy. Rusty lunged forward with a sharp bark, positioning himself between the cubs and the bear. His teeth bared, but even Maya could see the uncertainty in his movements. A bear like that wasn't something even a dog like Rusty could face down. "Go!" Rusty shouted to Maya, his voice filled with a sudden, desperate urgency. "Run!" Without thinking, Maya grabbed the cubs by their scruffs, pulling them toward the thickest part of the trees. She didn't need to be told twice. The bear's growl rang out behind them, its massive paws thundering against the ground. The chase had begun. And they had no idea if they'd make it out alive. The forest was alive with sound, footsteps pounding, leaves rustling, the frantic beating of hearts. Maya's breath came in sharp, shallow gasps as she ran, her cubs close behind, their tiny paws scrambling over the rough ground. Every step was a gamble, every sound a threat. The bear's growl echoed behind them, growing louder, closer. Maya didn't dare look back. She couldn't afford to. The only thing that mattered now was getting her cubs to safety. But where? The forest, once their sanctuary, now seemed like a labyrinth of danger. Rusty's warning echoed in her mind: "Don't look back. Keep moving." As she sprinted through the trees, her muscles burning with effort, Maya heard the thud of heavy paws getting nearer, the underbrush snapping beneath the weight of the creature chasing them. Her mind raced. There had to be a way out. There had to be somewhere safe. Mom? Mom, one of the cubs whimpered, their voice full of terror. I'm here, Maya gasped, her voice trembling, yet steady. She could hear the panic in her own voice, but she fought to keep it from her cubs. They needed her strength now. She couldn't falter. The trees around them seemed to close in tighter, the shadows deepening as the sun dipped lower. She could feel the temperature drop, the air turning cold and thick with the scent of impending danger. But there was something else, something strange. The wind had shifted, carrying with it an unmistakable scent. The metallic stench of the train. Her heart skipped a beat. They were near the tracks. Rusty had said they needed to get out of the forest, but could the tracks be their way out? The thought of crossing those tracks, where the train roared by with a terrifying, unthinkable force, sent a chill down her spine. But if the bear was right behind them, there was no choice. With the bear's growl still echoing in her ears, Maya spotted the faint glint of steel in the distance. The train tracks. They were closer than she thought. Maya. Rusty's voice cut through the tension, urgent. We need to get to the tracks, now. Maya didn't hesitate. The tracks were their only hope now. She veered toward them, urging the cubs to follow. Her paws seemed to fly over the ground, desperation pushing her forward. The bear's roar rumbled through the trees. Maya could hear it closing in, its ferocious charge relentless. She could feel its presence now, like a shadow behind her, ready to strike. But the tracks were so close. She could almost hear the distant hum of the train now, as if it were calling to her. Keep going. Rusty barked again, his voice strained but filled with determination. Maya urged her cubs faster. They were so small, so fragile. But their determination matched hers. They pushed through the fear, following their mother's lead, knowing that this was their chance to survive. Suddenly, the cubs stopped. Maya felt them freeze behind her. Her heart stopped for a moment too, her breath catching in her throat. What was it now? She turned, only to see the biggest cub, a male, staring ahead with wide, terrified eyes. He wasn't moving. His legs trembled, his body shaking in fear. Milo? Maya called, her voice breaking. The cub didn't respond. His gaze was locked on something in the distance. Maya followed his gaze, and her heart dropped into her stomach. The bear had stopped charging. It was now pacing just at the edge of the clearing, its eyes fixed on them with unblinking hunger. It knew they were close. It was waiting, watching, preparing to strike when they least expected it. Run! Rusty yelled, his voice full of panic now. Don't stop, Maya. But Maya couldn't move. She couldn't leave her cub behind. Milo, come on, she urged, her voice trembling with fear. But the cub didn't budge. He was too scared, too frozen by the terror of the massive bear that loomed just steps away. Maya's heart broke for him. She couldn't lose him. Not like this. Without thinking, Maya leaped toward Milo, her body shielding him from the bear. She could feel the weight of the bear's stare on her back, the crushing power of its presence. But she wasn't going to give up. Not now. Milo, she called again, more desperately this time, nudging him with her snout. We need to go, please. The cub blinked, his eyes unfocused, as if breaking through the haze of fear that had gripped him. Slowly, he took a step back, then another, until finally, he turned and started running. Maya didn't wait. She grabbed him again, urging him forward as the bear growled menacingly behind them. The sound was deafening now, the bear closing in again. Rusty barked from ahead, urging them to keep going. Don't stop, Maya. The train is coming. And then, in the distance, Maya saw it. The bright lights of the train, its rumbling power growing louder with each passing second. It was coming faster than she realized. She had to make it to the tracks. The only way out of this nightmare was to get there first. With one final push, Maya and her cubs ran, the bear only a few feet behind them. They were so close to safety. And then, the train appeared, its massive form charging toward them, its lights blinding in the night. Maya's heart raced. There was no turning back now. They had to cross the tracks, or they'd never escape the bear. Just as the bear lunged, ready to pounce, the train blasted its horn. The world seemed to freeze for a moment. The bear screeched, its body recoiling at the sound, momentarily stunned. Maya had no time to think. She pushed Milo and her other cubs forward, urging them onto the tracks just as the train barreled toward them. The thundering of the train, the shriek of the bear, and the frantic breaths of the cubs filled the air. And for a split second, Maya felt as if time itself had stopped. Would they make it? The deafening roar of the train drowned out everything, the bear's growl, the wind in the trees, even the frantic beating of Maya's heart. She could see the massive form of the train charging toward them, the screeching sound of its metal wheels echoing through the night. It felt as if time itself had slowed down, every second stretching out into eternity. For a brief moment, Maya felt a terrifying sense of helplessness. The bear was still close. Too close. Its angry growls filled the air, and Maya knew it wouldn't hesitate to attack. They were caught in the middle, the train approaching with unstoppable force, the bear's fury threatening to consume them. "Maya, jump!" Rusty's voice cut through the chaos, barely audible over the blaring horn of the train. Without thinking, Maya grabbed her cubs, her claws digging into the earth as she pushed them forward. The train was right on top of them now, its headlights blinding, its thunderous roar shaking the ground beneath her feet. She could feel the heat of the train's speed on her fur, its power threatening to crush them in an instant. She shoved Milo and her other cubs onto the tracks, pushing them as far to the side as possible, desperate to keep them out of harm's way. Her heart raced as she heard the bear's footsteps grow louder, its powerful body closing in. The train was only seconds away. She could already feel the wind from it, the pressure of its sheer size rushing toward them. "Maya!" Rusty's voice cracked, filled with panic. "You have to move." But Maya couldn't. She couldn't leave them. She couldn't leave her cubs in the path of the train, not with the bear so close. Her instinct screamed at her to act, to save her cubs, to get them out of the way, but her body froze. The roar of the train, the growl of the bear, everything was a blur, an overwhelming whirlwind of chaos. Suddenly, in that brief moment of confusion, the impossible happened. The bear lunged. Its jaws snapped shut, inches from Maya's flank, but it had miscalculated. In its hunger, it had underestimated the speed of the train. As the bear's claws dug into the earth, its eyes locked onto the cubs, its focus narrowing on them. But before it could react, the train hit the clearing with a force that sent the bear flying backward, its growl of fury turning into a desperate scream as the sheer weight and speed of the train pushed it away. Maya didn't waste a second. She dove forward, her body crashing against the cubs, pushing them off the tracks and out of harm's way. She heard the screech of the train's wheels as it skidded to a halt just inches away from them. The ground trembled under the power of the massive locomotive, and Maya's heart thudded in her chest as she felt the hot blast of air rush past her. But they were safe. They were alive. The train, now stationary, cast its bright lights over the scene, illuminating the wreckage left in the wake of its unstoppable force. Maya looked up, her heart still racing, her body trembling with the adrenaline of the moment. She saw the bear, now thrown several feet away, struggling to get up, its body dazed from the impact of the train. The bear growled weakly, its rage still simmering beneath the surface, but it didn't have the strength to continue the chase. It turned and limped off into the darkness, disappearing into the safety of the forest. Maya's breath came in ragged gasps, her mind still reeling from the near-death experience. She looked down at her cubs, who were huddled together in a tight knot, their eyes wide with fear but filled with relief. "We made it," Maya whispered, her voice breaking as she pulled her cubs into a tight embrace. "We made it." Rusty was by her side in an instant, his body shaking as he nudged her gently. "I knew you could do it, Maya. You saved them." Maya couldn't answer. She could barely find the words. She was overwhelmed, her emotions swirling, relief, exhaustion, fear, gratitude. But above all, she was grateful. Grateful that they were all alive, that they had escaped the bear's fury and the danger of the train. As she looked up at the still train, the reality of the situation began to sink in. They weren't safe yet. The forest was dangerous, and the bear was still out there. But for now, they had a chance. For now, they were together, and that was enough. "Let's move," Rusty said, his voice steady again. "We're not out of danger yet. But we'll find a way. Together." Maya nodded, feeling a sense of strength surge through her. She looked down at her cubs, their wide eyes still filled with fear, but she could see the trust in them. They believed in her. They knew she would protect them. She wasn't going to stop. Not now. Not ever. As the train continued to rest on the tracks, the night air calm once again, Maya gathered her cubs and Rusty close. They had survived the impossible. And now, they would survive whatever came next. The forest was still, the distant sounds of the night eerily quiet. Maya felt a sense of unease, but it wasn't just the silence that unsettled her, it was the weight of the uncertainty pressing down on her. The bear was gone for now, but the danger hadn't disappeared. There was always something lurking in the shadows. Always another challenge waiting to strike when least expected. Rusty stayed close, his presence a steadying comfort beside her. The cubs were huddled together, their tiny bodies pressed against her, seeking reassurance in her warmth. She could feel their fear, their vulnerability, but they were safe. For now. "Are we really safe?" one of the cubs asked, her small voice trembling. Maya looked down at her cubs, their wide eyes reflecting the fear and confusion of the past few hours. She wanted to tell them that everything would be okay, that they were out of danger, but the truth was, she didn't know what came next. All she could do was stay strong for them, just as she always had. "Yes," she whispered, "we're safe, for now. But we need to keep moving. The forest is dangerous, and we need to find a place to rest." With one last look at the train, which still stood silent on the tracks, Maya turned and began to walk. Her paws were sore, her body exhausted, But she couldn't stop now. Not when the threat of the bear and whatever else lurked in the night was still so fresh in her mind. They moved quietly through the forest, the shadows of the trees stretching long and ominous under the moonlight. Maya's instincts were sharp, her senses alert. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, made her pause, her ears straining to catch any sign of movement. But there was nothing. Just the cold, empty night surrounding them. It felt like hours passed before they reached a small clearing, a safer place, one she could feel a bit of peace in. Maya stopped and looked around, taking in their surroundings. It was a good place to rest. The trees were thick, the underbrush dense enough to offer some protection. She motioned for the cubs to stay close as she settled down, wrapping her body around them like a protective shield. Rusty sat beside her, his eyes scanning the forest, ever watchful. He hadn't said much since the train incident, but Maya could sense the relief in his quiet presence. They had made it through the worst of it. They had survived the bear, the train, and the night itself. But there was still an unspoken question between them. What now? "We'll be okay," Maya said softly, her voice more for herself than for anyone else. "We've made it this far. And we'll keep going, no matter what." Rusty nodded, his eyes softening as he glanced at her. "I believe in you, Maya. You're stronger than anyone I know." Maya didn't respond, though her heart swelled at his words. Strength, she thought. It wasn't just about surviving. It was about knowing when to fight and when to hold back, when to protect and when to let go. It was about carrying the weight of the world, even when it felt impossible. And in that moment, she realized something important. She wasn't just protecting her cubs. She was protecting herself. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were learning to live. Hours passed, and the cubs finally drifted off to sleep, their tiny bodies curled up against Maya for warmth. Rusty lay beside them, his own exhaustion settling in, though his eyes remained open, always alert. Maya let herself relax for a moment, letting the weight of the day fall away. She was tired, yes, more tired than she could ever remember being. But there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that, for now, they were safe. Together. The night stretched on, and the world around them seemed to grow stiller with each passing hour. The danger had not gone away, it never did. But in the quiet of the forest, under the safety of the trees, Maya allowed herself a small moment of peace. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if the bear would return or if they would face new threats on their journey. But as long as they were together, Maya knew they had a fighting chance. The forest might be full of dangers, but it was also full of beauty, of possibilities. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Maya allowed herself to hope. They had survived the impossible. And as long as she had her cubs and Rusty by her side, she knew they could survive anything. In the end, it wasn't just the danger that shaped them, it was the strength they found in each other. The love that had kept them going, even when everything else seemed lost. As the stars shone brightly above, Maya whispered into the night, "We'll be okay." And this time, she believed it. As the night fell silent, Maya and her cubs found a sense of peace, knowing that, no matter what dangers lay ahead, they were stronger together. But their journey was far from over. Will they survive the forest's dangers? Will the bear return? The story is still unfolding, and you don't want to miss what happens next. If you enjoyed this emotional journey of survival, strength, and love, don't forget to like, share, and comment below. We'd love to hear what you think. How did Maya's courage and determination inspire you? Let us know in the comments. Keep following their journey, there's so much more to come. Stay tuned for the next chapter in their incredible adventure.